My name is Margaret Hayes, and the day my daughter-in-law asked me to sign the power of attorney, the house I'd shared with my late husband felt colder than it ever had before. It was a quiet morning. Too quiet. Even the walls seemed to be holding their breath. Thomas had been gone barely a week. His boots still sat by the front door, his watch still ticking faintly on the dresser. I had been living inside his silence, trying to find peace in it. But that morning, peace ended with a single piece of paper slid across my own dining table. "Just a formality," Vanessa said, smiling like a professional actress. Her nails were polished, her perfume expensive, the kind that lingers even after the person leaves. "This will make everything easier for you, Margaret. You won't have to worry about any of the hard stuff anymore." I looked down at the papers. The header read, "Power of Attorney, Full Financial and Property Control." Underneath, in fine print, my name. Across from me sat my son, Daniel, the boy who once brought me flowers on Mother's Day without fail. Now his hands were folded neatly in front of him, eyes fixed on the table like a schoolboy caught cheating. He didn't look up once. Something inside me shifted, a quiet, steady awareness that this wasn't grief anymore. It was strategy. I traced my finger along the paper. "Why does this section say transfer of property ownership?" I asked. Vanessa's smile tightened, but only slightly. "Oh, that's just standard legal language. You'll still live here, of course. It just helps us handle your affairs if something unexpected happens." Unexpected? Like my own death? She said it so casually that my blood ran cold, but I didn't show it. Thomas had taught me that silence can be a weapon, sharper than any word. So I smiled back. "Well," I said softly, "then I'd like to read it carefully before I sign anything." That was the first crack in her perfect act. Her smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Behind that expression was something I hadn't seen before. Fear. That night I sat alone in the living room, the air thick with memories. The grandfather clock ticked, slow and deliberate, each sound echoing like a countdown. I could almost hear Thomas's voice in my mind, the one thing that had always anchored me. He used to say, "If anything feels wrong after I'm gone, promise me you'll look deeper. People show their truest selves when they think no one's watching." I thought of Vanessa, her eyes too bright, her tone too sweet, and Daniel too quiet, too compliant. Something was wrong. I walked to the study, the room Thomas called his war room. Every important document, every insurance policy, every letter of instruction, he kept them organized in labeled folders. One drawer was locked, though. I'd never opened it because Thomas had once said, "If you ever need to open this, it means the game has already begun." My hand trembled slightly as I used the small brass key he'd left in his desk. Inside was an envelope, addressed in his handwriting, "For Margaret. If they try." I unfolded it, expecting tears. Instead, I felt adrenaline. It said, "My love, if someone pressures you into signing away your control, do not argue. Do not confront. Observe. Record. I have left legal safeguards in place, but they require proof. Undeniable proof. Trust only Mr. Lawson. He knows everything. And remember, people who play games with power never expect the quiet one to play back." My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a letter. It was a plan. The next morning, Vanessa arrived early, too early. She brought coffee, the expensive kind Daniel couldn't afford, and a stack of revised documents. "Good morning, Margaret," she chirped. "I just wanted to make sure we go over these before your appointment." Appointment? I hadn't scheduled any, but she said it with such confidence that even Daniel seemed to believe it. I decided to play along. "Oh, of course," I said. "Thank you for being so thoughtful." She smiled. It mistook compliance for surrender. I like to be thorough. Inside, my fear turned into steel. Vanessa thought she was orchestrating a takeover. What she didn't know was that Thomas had already built the trap, and she was walking straight into it. That night, I called Mr. Lawson, Thomas's old lawyer. His voice was calm but urgent when I told him what was happening. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "I need you to come see me tomorrow. Don't sign anything. Bring the documents she gave you. Your husband prepared something, and I think it's time we used it." I hung up the phone, my heart racing. Outside, the wind rattled the windows like restless whispers. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, I didn't feel grief. I felt purpose, because Vanessa thought she was writing the story of how she took my life apart. But she didn't realize I was about to rewrite the ending. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The tick of the grandfather clock echoed through the living room like a slow heartbeat. I sat in my late husband's chair, the leather creaking under me, the smell of old tobacco still lingering, a smell that somehow made me feel less alone. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, thought I'd forgotten how to read the fine print. She thought the fragile woman sipping tea in silence was too weary to understand manipulation, but she was wrong. I didn't spend 40 years building a life with a man like Richard without learning a thing or two about survival. My husband wasn't just a man who left behind memories. He left behind systems, habits, and more importantly, secrets. Earlier that evening, after Vanessa and my son left, I went to the small study, a room she had already begun calling the office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of Richard's old desk and pulled out a black folder labeled Contingency. Richard used to joke that the folder contained insurance for when life goes sideways. I never thought I'd have to use it, but tonight I needed it. Inside, there was a sealed envelope addressed to me, dated only 3 months before his death. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was short, written in his steady hand. "If anyone ever asks you to sign away your rights, Margaret, go to Mr. Langford. He knows everything. And remember, power only belongs to those who believe they have none." I felt a strange chill. My husband had foreseen this moment. The next morning, I called Mr. Langford, the family lawyer Richard trusted for over 30 years. His voice was calm but cautious when I explained that Vanessa had presented me with legal documents I hadn't requested. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I think it's best you come see me in person and bring those papers with you. Don't sign a thing." I promised I wouldn't. That same morning, Vanessa appeared at my door again, holding a bright smile and a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for. "Good morning, Mother Hayes," she said sweetly. "I hope you had a restful night. I thought we could go over those forms again. I'll walk you through them this time, line by line." Her tone dripped with sugary concern, but her eyes were sharp, searching for compliance. I took the coffee, but didn't drink it. "That's thoughtful, dear," I said softly. "But I already have an appointment with Mr. Langford today. He can explain everything properly." The smile froze on her face. For a fraction of a second, I saw her mask slip, irritation flickering behind her eyes like a spark. "Oh, there's really no need for that," she replied, too quickly. "These are standard. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can take the stress off your shoulders." I smiled gently. "And yet," I said, "something tells me Richard would want me to be thorough." For the first time, Vanessa didn't have a rehearsed response. She tried to regain control, speaking in that slow, careful tone she used when she wanted to sound rational. "You know, at your age, dealing with paperwork can be overwhelming. We just want to make things easier for you." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that before or after you sell the house?" Her breath caught. Just a flicker, but I saw it. "Excuse me?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "I overheard you telling Daniel you'd put the property on the market once the power of attorney was signed. You should really lower your voice when scheming in other people's homes." The silence that followed was heavy. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she smiled again, not kindly, but coldly. "You misunderstood, of course. We just want what's best for the family." And with that she left, her heels clicking down the hallway like a warning. By the time I arrived at Mr. Langford's office, the fog outside had thickened, swallowing the town in gray. Inside, the lawyer looked up from behind his desk, his silver glasses glinting under the lamp. He said, after I explained everything, "You did the right thing calling me." He took the papers Vanessa had given me and began reading. His eyebrows furrowed as he turned each page. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Hayes," he said slowly, "these documents don't just grant power of attorney. They transfer complete ownership of your estate, assets, and medical decisions permanently." I sat back in the chair, my pulse steady. "Can she do that?" I asked quietly. "Only if you sign. But she's in for a surprise." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder marked "Confidential, Hayes Estate." Richard was meticulous. He added a private clause in his will that activates under very specific circumstances, including coercion or manipulation against you. If anyone tries to pressure you into signing away control, they automatically forfeit any claim to his inheritance. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My husband had prepared for this exact betrayal, not out of paranoia, but love. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Mr. Langford smiled faintly. "Nothing yet. Let them make the next move. Every word, every attempt to persuade you, we'll document it. Once they cross the line, we'll activate the clause." That night, I returned home and found Vanessa in the kitchen, pretending to cook. The air smelled like expensive perfume and tension. She glanced at me and said, "We've decided to move forward with the retirement home tour tomorrow. It'll be good for you, peaceful, safe." I nodded slowly, hiding my smile. "That sounds lovely. I'll be ready." She thought I was agreeing to her plan, but I was preparing for hers to collapse. Later, as I sat in bed, I reread Richard's letter and whispered into the quiet, "You always did know how to plan, didn't you?" The night outside was still, but I could feel something shifting. Not fear this time, but focus. The game had started, and Vanessa didn't even know she was already losing. The next morning arrived like a storm disguised in sunlight. The air outside was bright, almost too bright, as if the world itself wanted to distract me from what was about to unfold. I moved through the house quietly, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. Vanessa thought I was fragile, predictable, easily steered, the perfect mark. But I had lived long enough to know that silence often speaks louder than shouting. Today, my silence would set a trap. When she arrived to pick me up for the so-called retirement home tour, I was already dressed. Gray cardigan, pearls, and a soft blue scarf Richard had given me on our 40th anniversary. I wore it, not for sentiment, but for strength. Vanessa entered the living room, phone in hand, her voice sugary as ever. "Oh, you look lovely, Mother Hayes. This will be a wonderful day." She flashed that picture-perfect smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm sure it will," I replied evenly. "But before we go, I'd like to stop by Mr. Langford's office. He just called to update me about some of Richard's documents. You don't mind, do you?" Her expression faltered, just for a second. No, of course not, but perhaps we can do that later," she suggested, her fingers tightening around her purse. "I'd feel better doing it first," I said calmly. "After all, I wouldn't want to mix up legal matters with moving plans." There was a faint twitch in her jaw, but she recovered quickly, nodding. "Fine, whatever you prefer." As we drove through town, I noticed her knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. She tried to make small talk, but her words sounded rehearsed. "You'll love this new place, you know. The Stafford wonderful, the food's great, and—" I interrupted softly. "And I'll be far enough away for you to sell the house without my input?" Her eyes darted toward me, startled. I smiled faintly. "I may be old, dear, but I'm not blind." When we arrived at Mr. Langford's office, the lawyer greeted us with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Daniels," he said politely, gesturing toward the chairs. Vanessa's smile returned, but I could feel the tension humming in the air, like a low electric current. Mr. Langford placed the unsigned documents between us. "Before we proceed," he said, "I'd like to go over a few points. Transparency is important." He began reading aloud the clauses Vanessa had conveniently skipped the first time. Her smile began to crack as he reached the sections transferring my estate and medical rights. I must have downloaded the wrong version," she stammered. "That's not what we intended." "Of course," Mr. Langford said smoothly. "It happens, but you'll understand why I'll be filing this for record for your protection and Mrs. Hayes's." He slid the papers into a folder, sealing it with a practiced motion. "Protection?" she repeated, her voice thin. "Yes," I said gently, "from misunderstandings. You wouldn't want this to look like an attempt to defraud an elderly woman, would you?" Her face drained of color. She muttered something about being late and practically fled the office. I thanked Mr. Langford and assured him I'd keep him updated. As I stepped outside, the sun felt warmer, almost approving. I knew Vanessa wouldn't stop there. People like her never do. But now, the game was on my terms. That evening, as I poured myself a cup of tea, I noticed my son Daniel's car pulling into the driveway. He came in looking uneasy, eyes darting toward me like a child about to confess. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vanessa told me you're being manipulated. That lawyer's taking advantage of you." I smiled sadly. "Is that what she said?" He nodded, avoiding my gaze. "She's worried, that's all." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Daniel, your father trusted that lawyer for decades, but more importantly, he trusted me. Don't let fear turn you into someone else's puppet." He looked up, eyes filled with confusion and guilt. "I just want peace, Mom. So do I said softly, "and sometimes peace requires a little war." Later that night, after Daniel left, I called Mr. Langford again. "They'll make another move soon," I said. "Good," he replied. "We're recording every attempt. When they cross the line, we'll file the clause." I hung up and sat in the quiet, watching the reflection of the moon in the window. My reflection stared back, lined, wise and tired, but far from defeated. I thought of all the years I'd spent putting others first, keeping peace, swallowing words, but not tonight. Tonight, I was done being polite. 2 days later, the trap sprung itself. Vanessa returned, this time with a notary and 2 witnesses, friends of hers, clearly in on the plan. "Just formalities," she chirped as they entered. "It'll take 5 minutes." I played along, smiling faintly as she placed the documents before me. "You're right. It will," I said. I reached for the pen, my hand steady, but before I signed, I looked up at her. "Oh, I nearly forgot. Mr. Langford asked me to record our meetings for legal accuracy. Do you mind if I keep this running?" I gestured to the small voice recorder on the table. Her smile died immediately. "You what?" she hissed. "Oh, it's just to make sure everything is transparent," I said sweetly, repeating her favorite word. The witnesses exchanged nervous glances. Vanessa's voice rose. You're making this difficult, Margaret." I leaned forward slightly. "Am I? Or are you realizing this isn't as easy as tricking an old woman?" She froze, eyes wide, anger and panic fighting for control. I signed a blank sheet of paper beside the recorder. "There," I said calmly. "That's my signature, on my terms." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, the witnesses scurrying after her. The silence that followed was delicious. When she was gone, I allowed myself a slow, steady breath.
The trap had been set, and she had walked right into it. Words recorded, witnesses present, proof undeniable. Soon, she would learn that underestimating me was the most expensive mistake of her life.
The next morning began in eerie quiet. The birds outside seemed to hesitate before singing, as if the world itself sensed something had shifted. I woke up early, the house still soaked in dawn's gray light, and brewed my tea slowly, the way Richard always liked it. The steam curled upward, catching the sunlight and ribbons, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. By noon, Mr. Langford called. His voice was calm, but beneath that calm was something sharper. Satisfaction. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I just received a message from Mrs. Daniels. It seems she realized we filed a legal record of yesterday's encounter. And when I mentioned the audio recording, she hung up." I smiled faintly. "Then the message has been received." He chuckled softly. "That's not all. I've also sent a notice to your son, outlining the full scope of your late husband's protective clause. By law, any attempt to manipulate or defraud you voids their inheritance entirely." For a moment, I didn't speak. I just stared at the framed photo of my family on the mantel, the same one Vanessa had once held while pretending to care. The image felt heavier now. Its smiles more fragile. I whispered, "Richard, your plan worked." Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden, the one Richard and I had built together years ago. The roses had begun to bloom again, their color fierce and unapologetic. I heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway, his footsteps fast and uneven. He appeared at the garden gate, face pale, eyes wide. "Mom, Vanessa told me what happened. She said you tricked her, that you embarrassed her in front of everyone." I looked up at him calmly. "Did she also mention trying to steal everything your father and I worked for?" He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. "I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't." I stood slowly, leaning on my cane, but meeting his eyes with quiet strength. "I believe you, Daniel. But love without awareness is blindness. You can't keep letting others speak for you." His shoulders slumped, the weight of realization settling in. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said softly, "now we let truth do what it always does. Surface." That evening, I received a call from the local police. Apparently, Vanessa had attempted to access one of my bank accounts online using my credentials. What she didn't know was that Mr. Langford had already flagged the account for monitoring. It was all logged, the time, the IP, the attempt. She had crossed the final line. When the officers arrived at her house, Daniel was there too. He later told me she didn't even fight it. She just sat in silence as they read her rights. The town would whisper, of course. People always do. They'd say, "Did you hear about the Hayes family? The daughter-in-law who tried to take everything?" But behind those whispers would be another truth, one about an old woman who refused to be erased. A few days later, Daniel came back to the house. He looked smaller somehow, but more real, stripped of pride, stripped of pretense. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know what to say." I handed him a cup of tea. "Then don't," I replied. "Just sit." We sat together for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. Finally, he said, "I never realized how much you protected us. I let her turn me against you." I smiled faintly. "She used what you feared most, losing control. But strength doesn't come from control, Daniel. It comes from knowing when to let go." As he nodded, tears filling his eyes, I felt something release inside me too. Not bitterness, not revenge, but peace, the kind that comes only after a storm.
That night, as the house fell quiet, I went to Richard's study again. I opened his old desk drawer and placed his letter inside, folding it carefully. You were right, my love. Power only belongs to those who believe they have none. I lit a small candle beside the window and watched it flicker. Outside, the garden shimmered under moonlight, the same garden where we'd once dreamed of growing old together. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Vanessa's downfall spread quietly, but I didn't gloat. Instead, I rebuilt. I reopened the library club I used to host, invited the neighborhood children to play in the garden, and filled the house with laughter again. Every corner that once echoed with deceit now hummed with life. One afternoon, as I was pruning the roses, Daniel appeared again, this time holding a small box. "Dad's pocket watch," he said softly. "You should have it." I looked at the silver face, its ticking steady and strong. "No," I said gently, pressing it back into his hands. "You keep it. But remember what it stands for. Time reveals everything, even truth." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You're stronger than anyone I know, Mom." I smiled. "Not stronger, Daniel. Just older. Age teaches you that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers." That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink low over the horizon. The light turned the sky gold, and the wind carried the faint scent of roses. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, my home, my dignity, my trust, and yet, in the process, I'd rediscovered something far greater, myself. As the first stars appeared, I whispered into the fading light, "Richard, I kept your promise." Then I leaned back, letting the world settle around me in quiet harmony. Somewhere inside, I knew this was not just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of peace. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with noise or fury. It comes in silence, in patience, in the soft, unwavering strength of a woman everyone thought was too weak to fight back. Until she did. Weeks turned into months, and the air in the Hayes home changed. The stillness that once carried grief now hummed with quiet resilience. I'd grown used to the calm. No footsteps echoing down the hallway with hidden agendas, no false smiles hovering behind morning coffee. I could finally breathe again. Some nights, I'd sit by the fireplace and run my fingers along the carved initials on the mantel. R+M, 1978. It was where our story had started, and now, somehow, it felt like it was ending right where it should. One evening, as autumn painted the garden in gold and amber, Daniel came by again. This time, he wasn't nervous or apologetic. He was lighter, more grounded. He helped me gather fallen leaves and repair the fence Richard had built decades ago. "I've been going through Dad's old things," he said as we worked. "Found some letters he wrote before he passed. He left one for you that must have been misplaced." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name and Richard's handwriting, that same elegant, deliberate script that could steady me even after all this time. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note, and one line stopped my breath cold. "If you're reading this, it means you've been tested, and you passed." The letter continued, "You always feared being alone, Margaret, but loneliness is just the space where courage grows. You've protected our legacy not just with law, but with love. Don't let bitterness live where forgiveness could bloom. Our son will find his way back, because you never gave up on him." I felt tears blur my vision. It wasn't just Richard's foresight that saved us, it was the life we built together, one built on trust, patience, and strength. I folded the letter gently and looked up at Daniel, who was watching me quietly. "He knew this would happen," I whispered. Daniel's face softened. "He always believed in you, Mom." That night, something shifted between us, the kind of silent understanding that doesn't need words. After he left, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the framed memories.
Every room carried echoes of what was lost and what was found again. But then something unexpected happened. As I was tidying the old study, I found another envelope tucked behind Richard's law books. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was for Daniel. For a long moment, I just held it, wondering what kind of truth my husband had saved for our son. When Daniel returned the next day, I handed it to him. "From your father," I said simply. He opened it right there, eyes scanning the words. His lips trembled, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine emotion break through his carefully built walls. He looked up at me, voice shaking. He wrote that he left me the company shares, but only if I prove I can take care of people, not control them. He said he believed I'd learned that from you. Tears filled my eyes, but I smiled. Then maybe he left us both something to learn. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to visit more often. He took over managing Richard's foundation, not for profit, but purpose. We started organizing charity events, funding scholarships, rebuilding what greed had almost destroyed. Slowly, the world that Vanessa tried to corrupt began to heal. I heard through quiet whispers that Vanessa had left town. The charges against her were reduced after I requested leniency, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying hate is heavier than any inheritance. The day I signed the letter of forgiveness, I felt lighter than I had in years. One evening, as autumn painted the garden in gold and amber, I saw the sunset bleed across the sky in deep crimson and gold. The wind carried the scent of roses, and I felt Richard's presence beside me, not as memory, but as something alive, watching, proud. I whispered, "We made it through, love." And in that quiet moment, I realized something profound. Power doesn't come from wealth, titles, or documents. It comes from the courage to stand alone, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to outlast the storm. I turned toward the house, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky. My home, my story, my legacy. And as I stepped inside, I felt the peace of knowing that even when everything was nearly taken from me, I had reclaimed the one thing no one could steal: my voice. The fire crackled softly, and I sat down to write one final letter, not for Richard this time, but for Daniel. "Dear son," I began, "life will test you again, but when it does, remember what your father taught me. Power isn't given, it's chosen. Choose kindness even when the world doesn't deserve it. Choose honesty even when lies are easier. And never, ever underestimate a woman who's lived long enough to see the truth twice." When I signed my name, I felt Richard's hand in mine, steady, sure, eternal. I folded the letter, placed it on the mantel, and watched the last flickers of firelight dance across the room. Tomorrow would come, and with it new challenges, but tonight I had peace. And for the first time in a long time, peace was enough.